People say it's to save on VFX because it's easier in dark environments, but I disagree. Not that that's not a factor. I often download clips of scenes off YouTube and brighten them up and they look fine. I remember seeing some behind the scenes of some show and they had some super high quality monitors they watched the edits on. They calibrated in a pitch black room on an ultra mega HDR expensive screens. It ends up looking like ass on regular monitors with average lighting. Write a first-person perspective scary deep woods at darkness of night, realistic story about. Also make the ending good and clear and don't add ghosts or any fairy tale type shit. Make it realistic, no conversations. Make it feel as realistic as possible. Use simple English words that we use normally. Make the ending good and clear. Don't add just one sentence in the ending, make it clear. Add a lot of details into the story. Add so much details. Make it so much more longer than it originally is. It should be at least 1,000 words long. Make it as long as you possibly can. Add so much more details. Don't even try to make parts of it. Make it as long as you possibly can in one go. And don't ask me any questions. Don't add asterisk or hashtag in the story. Don't add titles or anything. Just the story in response. It was already past midnight when I realized I was lost. The air in the woods felt different at that hour, heavier, colder, thicker with sounds that didn't match what I'd heard in the day. I had been hiking since morning, and it was supposed to be just a short trip to clear my head, a couple of hours out and back before sunset. But I'd gone farther than I thought, and when the light began to fade I kept thinking I was close to the trailhead. Every few steps I told myself I recognized something, a stump, a rock, a bend in the path, but each one turned out to be something else that only looked familiar in the half-light. By the time I pulled my phone out, there was no signal. The battery was at 20%. I tried using the flashlight on it, but the beam felt weak, swallowed by the blackness between the trees. I stopped walking for a while and tried to listen. In the daytime the woods had a rhythm to them, birds, wind, insects, the kind of noise that sits in the background and feels almost safe. At night it all changes. The silence has gaps in it, and in those gaps you hear everything that shouldn't be there. Branches moving when there's no wind. Something small running across leaves. My breathing sounded too loud. I turned off my phone light to let my eyes adjust. It didn't help much. The darkness in those woods wasn't like the dark in a room or a street at night. It was total, a kind of dark that feels solid, like it presses on your eyes instead of just hiding things from them. I started walking again because standing still made it worse. The ground was uneven, roots and rocks catching under my boots. Every few steps I stumbled or had to catch myself on a tree. The bark was damp and cold, the smell of earth and rot thick in my nose. My jacket was wet with sweat even though the air was cold. I kept thinking of the map I'd looked at earlier in the day, how the trail looped near a stream and a dirt road. If I could find that stream, I could follow it out. That was the plan. Find running water, follow it downhill, find people or a road. After what felt like half an hour, I heard something that might have been water. A faint trickling sound. I turned toward it and kept moving, using the sound as my guide. It grew louder, steadier, and then I stepped into a patch of softer ground that sank under my weight. Mud sucked at my boots. I shined the light again and saw a narrow creek glinting in the beam. Relief hit me for a second. I followed it, moving carefully along the edge, trying to keep my footing. The current looked shallow but strong, cutting through the roots and stones. The air felt colder near it. I remember thinking that as long as I stayed with the creek, I'd eventually reach something, someone's property, a road, a fence, anything. But the woods didn't open up. They got denser. Branches reached over the creek like claws, and the ground sloped upward on both sides. The stream carved a small trench I had to walk inside of. The mud got thicker, sucking at my boots until one nearly came off. I pulled it free and kept going. My phone battery dropped to 10%, then 5%. I kept checking it like that would help. The screen's glow was the only light I had left, and I was using it up with every glance. I tried to ration it by turning it off between steps, but that just made the darkness worse when it came back on. At some point I noticed there were fewer sounds. Even the creek seemed quieter. The air felt still, and every step I took sounded too loud again. I thought I heard something behind me, maybe a branch snapping, but when I stopped, it stopped too. I turned and shined the light but saw nothing. Just the trees, the uneven shadows of trunks stretching up and disappearing into black. I told myself it was an animal, a raccoon or a deer, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was following me. Every few minutes, another soft sound, leaves shifting, something brushing against bark. My legs were getting heavy, and my hands were shaking from cold and nerves. I wanted to rest, but sitting down felt like giving up. I decided I'd keep walking until the phone died, then stop and wait for daylight. It couldn't be that many hours away. I followed the creek until the banks opened into a wider clearing. The moonlight was faint but enough to see shapes. There was a fallen tree across the water, half sunk into the mud. I sat on it to catch my breath. My phone said 2:47 a.m. 3% battery. The clearing wasn't quiet like the rest of the woods. There was a low hum, not mechanical but something in the air, like a distant highway, except I knew there wasn't one anywhere near here. I thought maybe it was wind in the trees, but the leaves barely moved. I looked around and saw something on the ground a few feet away, fabric. I got up and pointed my light. It was an old backpack, dirty, half buried in mud. I hesitated before touching it. When I did, it felt stiff and damp, like it had been there for a long time. The zipper was rusted shut. I kicked it slightly, and it made a dull clinking sound, something metal inside. I didn't want to open it. I don't even know why. Maybe because it meant someone else had been out here, and if that person didn't make it out, what did that mean for me? My phone buzzed weakly as a low battery warning popped up. I turned it off and just stood there in the clearing, my breathing clouding in front of me. I wanted to believe I could wait until morning, that everything would look different in daylight, but I couldn't shake the sense that I wasn't alone. Not in a supernatural way, just that something or someone else was moving through the same woods, maybe lost like me, maybe not. I sat back down on the log and tried to stay still. Every now and then I thought I saw movement at the edge of the clearing, but it could have been my eyes playing tricks. Time started to blur. The cold crept up my arms and legs. I pulled my jacket tighter, tried to stay awake. The hum in the air came and went like waves, and then I heard a new sound, something metal scraping lightly, not far away. I didn't move. My heartbeat was so loud I thought it would give me away. I kept my eyes fixed on the dark. The sound came again, closer this time, like metal brushing against stone. I turned on my phone light one last time and swept it across the clearing. Nothing. Just trees, mud, the stream. Then the light flickered and went out for good. I stayed frozen for what felt like hours. Eventually, I stopped hearing anything at all. My body went from tense to numb. The cold was deep enough to make my thoughts slow. I leaned back against the tree and must have drifted off for a while, because when I opened my eyes again, there was a faint gray light in the sky. Morning. I could see the outlines of everything now. The creek, the trees, the clearing, it all looked smaller, less threatening. The backpack was still there. I kicked it again, and the metal sound clinked faintly. Curiosity finally got the better of me, so I pulled the zipper hard until it gave. Inside were a few rusted cans, a knife, and a folded piece of faded paper. I opened it. It was a map, hand-drawn, with a line following the same creek I'd been walking along. The line stopped where the clearing was. Near the edge of the paper, in shaky letters, someone had written "Don't follow the water." I stood there staring at it for a long time, not sure what to feel. I looked up at the creek again. The current looked calm, almost inviting now in the daylight. I realized I had no idea where I actually was, how far I'd gone, or how to get back. The only thing I knew for sure was that someone else had been right here before me, maybe sitting on the same log, maybe reading that same note. I folded the paper, stuffed it in my pocket, and turned away from the water. The sun was starting to rise through the trees, thin lines of light cutting through the mist. I picked a direction uphill and started walking. I didn't look back at the creek again. It took hours before I finally reached a dirt road, muddy and full of tire ruts. My legs barely worked by then. I find any dense woodland shits me up when it reaches threatening o'clock. It can be the most idyllic woodland, but when the light starts to drop just right, it starts to take on a sinister tone that just seems to say better head for shelter in that weird part of your mind you can't understand that seems to have existed longer than you've lived. Write a first-person perspective scary cabin story about. Also make the ending good and clear and don't add ghosts or any fairy tale type shit. Make it realistic, no conversations. Make it feel as realistic as possible. Use simple English words that we use normally. Make the ending good and clear. Don't add just one sentence in the ending, make it clear. Add a lot of details into the story. Add so much details. Make it so much more longer than it originally is. It should be at least 1,000 words long. Make it as long as you possibly can. Add so much more details. Don't even try to make parts of it. Make it as long as you possibly can in one go. And don't ask me any questions. Don't add asterisk or hashtag in the story. Don't add titles or anything. Just the story in response. It was late in the afternoon when I started down the narrow track through the woods. The air had that stillness that comes before dusk, when the wind seems to stop moving and everything feels like it's holding its breath. I'd been walking for a few hours, trying to find the old cabin marked on a map I'd found in my uncle's things after he died. He'd used it as a hunting spot years ago, or so the note beside the map had said. I wasn't hunting, I just wanted to see it. Maybe spend a night there, get away from the noise of everything for a bit. The path started out clear enough, dry dirt, flattened grass, a few boot tracks that looked months old, but it got rougher as I went deeper. The trees closed in until I could barely see the sky. Every sound seemed louder, the crack of a twig, the flutter of a bird taking off, the distant groan of wood moving in the wind. I kept telling myself it was fine. It was just a forest, a bit darker than I liked, but harmless. The smell changed as I walked. The sweet smell of pine gave way to something damp and old, like rotting leaves in still water. My boots sank a little with each step. The light dimmed faster than I expected. It was that strange time of day when it isn't dark yet, but everything's tinted gray-blue and shadows start to look thicker than they should. I remember thinking how the trees seemed closer together now, how the air felt heavier. My phone had no signal. I kept it in my pocket anyway, checking it every few minutes like it might suddenly start working again. When I finally saw the cabin, I almost walked past it. It sat low among the trees, half covered by vines and moss. The roof had sunken on one side, and a dead branch leaned against it like a crutch. The door was slightly open, pushed inward by years of wind. I stood there for a bit, just staring. There was no sound except for the faint ticking of insects starting up for the night. I stepped inside. The floor creaked hard enough to make me stop. It smelled of damp wood and old smoke. Dust hung in the air, floating in the last bit of light that came through a cracked window. There was a small table in the corner, a chair missing one leg, and a cast iron stove rusted through at the bottom. A few empty cans were stacked on a shelf. The walls were covered in dark stains where rain had leaked through. It wasn't much, but it was shelter, and the thought of walking back through the woods in the dark didn't sit right with me. I laid my bag down and sat on the floor. The wood felt cold through my jeans. I had a flashlight, a lighter, and a bottle of water. I checked the stove. It wouldn't work, not without cleaning and patching. I didn't plan on lighting a fire anyway. I ate half a sandwich and a granola bar and drank some water. The light from outside faded until the room turned into shapes and outlines. I turned on the flashlight and set it on the table, pointing it at the ceiling. The forest changed sound when night came. It wasn't quiet anymore. Crickets, frogs, the occasional rustle in the brush outside. I kept telling myself it was fine, just animals. I wasn't scared, not exactly, just aware. Every sound felt closer than it probably was. The cabin walls were thin, and each creak sounded like footsteps somewhere else in the structure. At some point, I decided to lie down. I used my jacket as a pillow. I didn't sleep right away. My mind was too awake, too busy listening. The flashlight dimmed a little, flickering. I reached out to tap it, and that's when I heard it, a short, heavy thump from outside. It wasn't far, maybe 10 feet from the cabin. I froze. Another thump, slower, like someone stepping on soft ground. I sat up, listening hard. My heart was beating so loud I thought it might drown out the sound. The noise stopped. Then, after what felt like a minute, there was a faint drag, like something being pulled across leaves. I held my breath. I wanted to look out the window but couldn't make myself move. It went quiet again. Completely quiet. Even the crickets stopped. I turned off the flashlight, thinking if something was out there, maybe it wouldn't notice me if I stayed still. The dark was total. I couldn't even see the outline of my hands. For a while, nothing happened. I started to think I'd imagined it. Maybe it was a branch falling or an animal moving around. I tried to lie down again. I just started to relax when something brushed the side of the cabin. A light scrape, like fingers or claws against wood. I felt every hair on my arms stand up. The scraping moved along the wall toward the door. I could hear it pause there. I didn't move. The door was still open a few inches from when I came in. The air inside the cabin felt thinner, like the room was holding its breath with me. Then the sound stopped. No wind, no insects, just the faint thud of my heartbeat in my ears. Minutes passed before I reached for the flashlight. My hand shook so much I almost dropped it. I switched it on and pointed it at the door. Nothing. Just the gap and darkness beyond it. I waited another few seconds, then stood up slowly. My legs felt weak. I stepped toward the door, shining the light outside. The ground looked undisturbed. The trees stood in a tight ring around the clearing, black against the faint glow of the sky. I stepped out, scanning the area. That's when I saw the shape on the ground, about 20 feet from the cabin. It wasn't clear at first, just a dark patch against darker dirt. I walked closer, careful not to make noise. It was a deer. Or what was left of one. Its neck was bent at an angle that didn't look natural, and the body had been dragged, leaving a trail in the mud that led from deeper in the woods. The smell hit me a second later, metallic and sharp. I crouched down and saw that the wound was clean, not torn like a predator's work. Cut. The front legs were bound with rope, frayed at the ends. My stomach turned cold. Whoever had done that was still out here. Maybe close. I turned back toward the cabin, the flashlight shaking in my hand. That's when I saw the second thing. My boot prints from earlier were there in the dirt, but next to them were others, larger, heavier, pressed deeper into the ground, following the same path as mine. They hadn't been there when I arrived. I didn't think after that. I went straight into the cabin, grabbed my bag, and stuffed my things inside without turning off the light. I looked around once more, saw the open window at the back, and decided to go through that instead of the front door. I climbed out, crouched low, and started moving fast toward where the trees thinned out. The forest felt endless. Every few seconds I thought I heard movement behind me, a step, a breath, the faint sound of something brushing against bark. I didn't look back. I just kept moving. My flashlight beam bounced wildly across the ground, sometimes catching the gleam of eyes from animals watching me pass. After what felt like an hour but was probably 15 minutes, I saw the faint shimmer of the road through the trees. I broke into a run. When I reached the edge of the forest, I turned once, just to see. The woods looked still, quiet again, but I knew something was there. Watching, maybe waiting. I walked the rest of the way to where I'd parked my car earlier that day. The engine turned over slow, then caught. I drove without stopping until I saw lights from a small town ahead. I pulled into a gas station and sat there for a while, hands still trembling on the wheel. When I looked in the side mirror, I saw mud streaked across the back of my jacket. Rope fibers stuck to it, the same kind I'd seen around the deer's legs. I don't know how they got there. Maybe I brushed against them. Maybe not. I never went back to that forest. A few weeks later, I checked the local news online. A missing persons report had been filed 2 days before my trip. Last seen hiking near the same area. They never found him. I still think about that cabin sometimes, about the sound outside, the marks on the ground, the quiet that came just before dark. It's strange how a place can look peaceful and the ruins is what you were looking for 100%. Write a first-person perspective scary hiker at darkness of night in woods, realistic story about. Also make the ending good and clear and don't add ghosts or any fairy tale type shit. Make it realistic, no conversations. Make it feel as realistic as possible. Use simple English words that we use normally. Make the ending good and clear. Don't add just one sentence in the ending, make it clear. Add a lot of details into the story. Add so much details. Make it so much more longer than it originally is. It should be at least 1,000 words long. Make it as long as you possibly can. Add so much more details. Don't even try to make parts of it. Make it as long as you possibly can in one go. And don't ask me any questions. Don't add asterisk or hashtag in the story. Don't add titles or anything. Just the story in response. The air was heavy that night. The kind that felt damp and pressed against your skin no matter how many layers you wore. I had been walking since late afternoon, thinking I'd make it back to my car before the sun went down, but I misjudged the trail. The map said the loop would take 3 hours, but somewhere along the way I must have taken a wrong turn. The woods out here in the northern hills weren't the kind that welcomed you with open spaces and friendly trails. They were old, thick, and full of trees that seemed to have grown closer together over the years, their branches knitting above to choke out what little moonlight there was. By the time I realized how dark it had gotten, I was already deep in it. The flashlight I brought wasn't anything special, just a small one I kept in my pack. When I turned it on, the beam looked weak against the dark, swallowed up by trees and fog. The trail markers that had been clear during the day were now hard to see, and the dirt path blended with the forest floor. Every few steps, I'd stop and listen, trying to hear the crunch of gravel that meant I was still on the path, but all I got was the quiet sound of wind pushing through branches, the occasional crack of something moving far off. I kept walking, telling myself I'd hit the road soon, but my sense of direction was gone. I'd turn one way, then another, and everything looked the same: dark trunks, wet leaves, roots that caught your boots when you weren't paying attention. After about an hour, I started to feel that kind of panic that builds slowly. My chest felt tight. I tried to stay calm, telling myself people got turned around all the time. I'd just find high ground, spot the ridge, and follow it down. But every rise I climbed led to another thicket of trees. I decided to follow the sound of water. Somewhere off to my right, I could hear a stream. Running water usually meant a way out, maybe a road or campsite nearby. I pushed through the underbrush, the flashlight bouncing with every step, and after a few minutes, I reached a narrow creek cutting through the forest. The water was clear, running fast over rocks, and I felt a little relief. I followed it downstream, thinking it would eventually lead to something man-made. But the woods only got darker. The ground near the creek was slick and uneven, and a few times I slipped and went down hard. My hands were muddy, the sleeves of my jacket soaked through. I could feel the cold now, sharp and constant. When I stopped to check my phone for a signal, it just showed the same single bar flickering uselessly. I switched it off to save the battery. The more I walked, the more the woods started to feel different, heavier somehow. The air smelled stale, not the clean scent of pine and dirt from earlier, but like something old and closed off. Then I started noticing shapes in the dark that didn't fit, the edges of stones stacked too evenly to be natural. I thought maybe it was an old campsite, or a wall from a long-gone property. The flashlight caught the corner of a flat stone structure, covered in moss and vines. I stepped closer, brushing some of the growth away. The stone was carved, smooth in places where the weather hadn't eaten it. It looked like part of a building, just a section of a wall, broken and leaning. I followed the stones further, and soon I was standing in what looked like the remains of an old structure. The roof was gone, the walls broken down, and trees had grown up through the gaps. It was hard to tell what it used to be, maybe a farmhouse or a church. The ground inside was uneven, covered in a layer of leaves and mud, but there were shapes half buried beneath it. I knelt down and brushed some of it away with my hand. Underneath was stone again, flat and squared, like the floor of whatever building this had been. There were metal fragments too, rusted pieces that might have been tools or hinges. I found what looked like the corner of an old staircase leading down, but it was mostly filled in with dirt and roots. I don't know why, but I felt this pull to look around more, even though everything in my gut told me I should leave. I kept shining the light around and saw more stone outlines, like several buildings had once stood here. The whole area felt sunken, like the forest had grown over a village that time forgot. I told myself I'd take a quick look and then get back to the creek, but I ended up wandering deeper into the ruins. The flashlight was starting to dim, flickering now and then, and I cursed myself for not packing extra batteries. That was when I started hearing the sounds, soft, short cracks of branches snapping nearby. At first, I thought it was just animals. The woods were full of deer, maybe raccoons. But the sounds didn't move away. They came closer, stopped, then started again. I froze, trying not to breathe too loud. The sound came from my left, maybe 30 feet away. I swung the light in that direction, but it only lit up trees and brush. The beam was weak, the shadows long. I stood still for what felt like a full minute, waiting, but nothing happened. I decided to move slowly back toward the creek, keeping my steps quiet. Every few seconds, I'd hear another crack somewhere behind me, like something matching my pace. The flashlight dimmed again, and I smacked it with my palm to keep it alive. That's when I smelled it, the faint, sour smell of smoke. Not wood smoke, but the kind that comes from something burning that shouldn't be burning. I turned and saw a faint orange glow through the trees, not far away. My first thought was relief, maybe another hiker, maybe a campfire or someone living off-grid. I walked toward it, careful but curious. When I got closer, I realized it wasn't a fire burning openly. It was more like the last of an old fire pit, a few embers glowing inside a circle of stones. Around it were what looked like old supplies, an overturned bucket, a length of rope, a torn tarp. Everything looked abandoned, but not long ago. There were footprints in the mud, deep ones, like someone had been moving heavy things around. I stood there, scanning the area, and that's when I saw the tent. It was small and faded, half collapsed, and one side had been cut open. Inside, I could see a sleeping bag, a lantern, and a few food wrappers. Everything looked like it had been there maybe a few weeks, maybe less. I called out once, just a soft hello, even though I'd promised myself not to. No answer. I waited, then checked the sleeping bag. It was damp but still zipped, like whoever had used it left in a hurry. That uneasy feeling in my chest came back hard. I backed away from the tent and looked around one last time before turning back toward where I thought the creek was. But the forest had swallowed the path again. My flashlight finally gave out, leaving me with just the dim light of the dying embers. I took one of the burnt sticks and tried to use it as a torch, but it didn't last long. I ended up walking in the dark, one hand on trees to keep my direction straight. I walked until I couldn't anymore, my legs heavy, my throat dry. I finally stopped beside a tree and sat down, pulling my jacket tight. The night sounds had faded, replaced by an awful silence. I don't know when I fell asleep, but I woke up to the faint light of morning. Everything looked different in daylight, smaller, less threatening. I found the creek again not far from where I'd stopped. Following it for another mile, I finally reached an old dirt road. A few hours later, a ranger found me walking along it. He said the ruins I'd found were part of an abandoned settlement from the early 1900s, wiped out by a landslide. Nobody lived there anymore, hadn't for decades. He said hikers sometimes stumbled on it by mistake, though it wasn't on any official maps. When I told him about the tent, he nodded slowly and said they'd found it too, months ago, but no one ever came back for it. That part stayed with me more than anything else. The thought that someone else had been there, maybe lost like I was, maybe never found their way out. Even now, I think about those ruins sometimes, how quiet it was, how the forest had swallowed everything but the stones. I tell myself I'll never go back there, and I mean it. There's something about that place that doesn't want to be found again.